Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for taking time to discuss this very important topic today. Everybody is getting hilariously rich and you're not. That was the headline in January of 2018 in the New York Times in reference to the crypto boom. Everybody is getting hilariously rich and you're not. This was what the world thought of our industry and our culture when there was a ton of money in this space and perhaps not enough adoption. Those of us who have been in this space for as long of time as myself, and I'm sure many of you, are working very hard to try and change the impression of what the world thinks of crypto and especially blockchain technology. And that's how we come to the subject of social impact. I am the co-founder of Kenetic, which is a blockchain investment firm. I'm also the founder of the Ethereum Meetup. And as we've kind of taken this journey in developing blockchain technology and investing in this space, we've come to the conclusion that there has to be more than just the commercial aspect. And for the world to take us seriously and for us to really show traction and adoption, we must turn towards how we can seriously and substantially help our fellow people. So Nydia and I, we started something called Social Alpha. And I have to say that it's probably one of the organizations that I hope will really be part of the legacy of what we leave behind. And we hope that it will be part of that effort to really make change in the world, using the types of resources that we've been fortunate enough to try and help grow in blockchain and crypto, directed towards actually making the world a better place. So with that, I want to turn it over to Nydia, who is the chairman and co-founder of Social Alpha, to talk a little bit about the mission of Social Alpha and also the types of collaborations we're doing.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Nydia Zhang. I am the co-founder and chairman of Social Alpha Foundation. Thank you, Jehan, for the kind introduction. And I want to share a little bit of Social Alpha's origin story as we started this panel. Social Alpha Foundation was founded in late 2017 as it was an exciting and special time when cryptocurrency and blockchain start to enter the mainstream media and society. It was a time that we see tremendous amount of capital, interest, and people rushing into the space, trying to build, try to create, and try to make things happen. And that was also at the time we realized we actually need to rebuild and to reshape the image of blockchain so the general public, so different industries, different sectors can actually see what the real blockchain potential can deliver. With that saying, we started Social Alpha Foundation in 2017. That Social Alpha Foundation is a non-for-profit grant-making foundation that support blockchain education and blockchain application. We offer no-string-attached grants and support for fundamental blockchain research and study on an emphasis of social impact. And we also offer application grants for non-commercial blockchain applications that tackle social welfare issues with a focus of public health, education, and environment. In 2018, it was an amazing year for a young organizations like us. We compete 6 grants, and the grantees range from individuals to blockchain applications and then brand-name institutions at universities. We work with sovereign ID projects, we work with researchers, and we work with Tsinghua University, Cornell University, think tanks like New America, and then agents like UNOPS. So in 2019, Social Alpha Foundation, we have made a decision that we want to see the environment as our 2019's focus, because in the scope of the world that we see, environmental issues has already entered a point that not only requires immediate action from every member, every community, and every country in this planet, but also requires the innovation from exponential, impactful technology like blockchain that can potentially offer solutions and tools to help alleviate the environmental crisis that the world is facing. So I'm here. We are very proud and very excited to announce our first grantee in 2019, which is the Open Lab initiative inside of Yale University. So Martin, who's sitting next to me, is the founder of the Open Lab. So the Open Lab initiative is a joint initiative between the Tsai Center for Innovative Thinking and Center for Business and Environment inside of Yale University. This is an amazing initiative that not only incubate blockchain for environment projects, but also help to create a robust blockchain education ecosystem inside of Yale University. So without further ado, I'm gonna hand it over to Martin to elaborate this initiative a little bit further.
Thank you, Nydia, and honestly, it's exciting to be able to work with both of you and Social Alpha in this challenge. Yale University has a strong history on environmental studies and action. And when we started the Open Lab was with the premise that global Earth system challenges are the opportunity for us to collaborate as a civilization. And so we look at grand challenges and the intersection of emerging technology with a focus on blockchain. And from there, incubate and produce open source projects that can leverage radical collaboration around these efforts. And so it is thanks to having visionaries that have this idea that blockchain also brings an important layer for global environmental action that we can do what we are said to do. And I can definitely talk a bit about some of the projects that we have, but particularly the one that has connected us, which relates around climate change. And perhaps I can talk a bit about the underpin of how tangible this challenge is. And this has been part of our conversations in the last couple of months that has also been inspiring from our side to be able to share that. Climate change is a problem that is not going anywhere. It's just gonna keep coming back every year. For us to have an idea, we have increased temperature by 1 degree relative to pre-industrial levels. And with total scientific unequivocal consensus, we need to prevent that warming above 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees. In 2015, in the Paris Agreement and the UNFCCC, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, we agreed that we would make efforts to prevent warming to above 1.5. Now, what that produces is that we now have a very limited carbon budget, amount of emissions that we can bring into our atmosphere to stay within that climate boundary. If we want to give numbers to it, that's around 600 gigatons of carbon dioxide that we can still bring into the environment and stay within this threshold. Past this threshold, we're going into irreversible damage of the climate fabric at a planetary level. And we, every year, pump into around 40 gigatons. So we are now in the capacity of burn through our carbon budget in under 15 years. So when we think about blockchain, what we now have is a single budget, a single ledger, and every time we emit, we are introducing records into that ledger. It doesn't yet exist, it exists in the natural world. Now, what our task is to really explore and develop some of the key solutions that blockchain can have in this climate and carbon accounting world. And I can share a bit about how we've come about this challenge, because there's a lot of work done in the climate space, and there's almost like no need to come and reinvent climate science. And since the blockchain world started, there's been a lot of little snippets of innovation also happening. One thing that we know blockchain can do is help through interconnection with IoT devices, verify an action, certify an action, produce a record with almost a non-fungible token out of that, and then we can trade carbon credits. Now, it would be great if we could solve this problem by things around, for example, Nydia plants trees somewhere, produce a token, a carbon credit, I buy it, and I offset my flight from my trip to New York. But those things are extremely important, and that technology is advancing. What our approach is, where does this fit at the global context? And for this, we normally divide it into two parts. On one side, we have the planetary track of accounting. That is a single budget, a single atmospheric space, and the consumption of that relates to understanding provenance of emissions. So the integration of, for example, fossil fuel extraction and being able to bring IoT and blockchain into records of every single gallon of crude oil that comes into our system, this is going to be very important, and to have consensus around how we're consuming that budget. The other side is all the sets of social structures that we've built around our world. So countries, cities, organizations. So we also find that the role that blockchain has on keeping immutable records of every time there's a climate action pledge. For example, Hong Kong, a couple of years ago, pledged to reduce its total carbon intensity by around 60%, which is a net carbon reduction of around 30% by 2030. But we think that being able to give accountability to these actions is very important, that they aggregate to a global level, that we're able to bring in projects that are attached to that climate pledge, and that we're able to bring in a lot of the tool bags from the blockchain space, smart contracts that can fit on top of records, to be able to track exactly how those projects are advancing. We're also able to think about whether those climate pledges are strong enough. If we think strictly around a planetary budget, the world needs to be net zero carbon by 2050. That means 35 years from now, the entire energy system as we know it needs to change radically. So the amount of capital that needs to go towards that is huge. We have to see how we're going to track these pledges to see if they indeed stack up to a 2050 target. So we are excited to bring in both our long legacy at Yale University on environmental studies, and leveraging also from both of your work at Social Alpha and Kenetic a lot of the lessons learned from the blockchain world, because in this intersection we think there's a very promising partnership. Our approach as universities, I guess, separate to maybe what a startup approach is we need to start working with the key stakeholders that are involved in Earth system governance today. By that I mean the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and their existing platforms, so blockchain might have a very critical layer that we think can be built into that. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that is the fundamental scientific board around that. And at the end of the day, what our project is based on is radical collaboration, so totally open source, inviting any participant that is working on a technological solution that can plug into this to work with us. The way we're planning this next year, thanks to Social Alpha support, is to do a series of multi-stakeholder design sprints to elucidate very clearly which one is the best leverage point where blockchain can have a very critical game-changing effect on carbon and climate accounting, and then do fast prototyping to it, bring in more partnerships around that.
Great. Thanks for that very comprehensive explanation. I think, again, for those of us who are, native to the kind of blockchain and crypto community as investors or practitioners and developers, I think it's important for us to be talking about things other than our own industry and other than, the business side of it. So the reason why we chose to support Martin and Yale is partially because, as we experience in the blockchain world, one of the biggest challenges is actually adoption. We're building great technology, theoretically it all works, but actually getting users into the system has proven to be very, very difficult. And that's no different in the social impact space as it is in our space. And I think that, part of what you mentioned the kind of the framework that you're creating for the ledger. One of the reasons we were very interested in this particular solution is because of Yale's position in the overall context of kind of environmental causes and research. And I think one of the things we learned is that as you're trying to drive adoption, it takes more than just the technology. It literally takes a consensus and the buy-in of different stakeholders who can drive that adoption through more than just straight kind of consumer acquisition or customer acquisition. Can you tell us a bit about Yale's position in the ecosystem where we think this solution would have ideally a better chance of being adopted than, say, a startup who's going after the same thing, the UN, the types of framework, and tell us a bit about the mechanism by which a global universal ledger would be adopted by governments such that it could produce and track as we would like it to.
Right. Well, I think that's the role that we have as universities. We need to be stewards of knowledge. We need to be stewards of neutral perspectives to some extent. And science always goes to that objective angle. So the university itself is older than the United States, and it has a very prestigious environmental program. There's been a lot of work done in climate change analysis. One of our lead economists in climate and economic studies just won the Nobel Prize this year, and that was a great honor for the university. And this also ties with our angle around the Open Innovation Lab is fundamentally everything we do is out, public, and open to the world. So I think that gives us a neutrality that there's no specific gain for the university other than the pursuit of knowledge and the preservation of nature, which is what scientific knowledge is telling us. And that makes it obviously very a bit more credible to work with governmental and intergovernmental organizations. But fundamentally as well, these global organizations also look towards universities for anchor points around how to guide our actions. Most of the climate science work around the world is a decentralized effort from universities and institutes around the world that get together at the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and they give their definitive information towards the United Nations about what should be the direction. So it's always science in its basic part that informs governance. But in the case of technology, we can also inform about there's also a lot of noise. And by really going into deep fundamental premises about the blockchain's merits to some of these efforts, it allows us to also inform where that technological layer has indeed a role. And your second question on adoption really comes in through being able to work directly with, on one side, multilateral organizations, and UN is obviously an important one. But thankfully, the UN in the last couple of years have been a lot more open to mixed top-down and bottom-up approaches. The Paris Agreement fundamentally was a bottom-up approach because the UN opened its doors and told countries, you tell us what you're doing about climate change. And in this sense, the community can speak. And so with that opening around UN's vision, blockchain also brings a lot of great tool bags for bottom-up action and recording information.
Okay, one more question for you, and then I have a question for Nydia as well. From a layman's perspective, we have, what was it, potentially 15 years before we've expended our climate budget. What happens if we go past it? From a user perspective.
From a user perspective, it's not going to be you're going to wake up one morning and things are going to change. It's going to look the same. And this is one of the fundamental problems of climate change. The feedback mechanism that the planet has to ourselves has fundamental latency. We don't equate weather and climate. We don't go out and we don't realize radical changes overnight. We have been realizing this with economic expansion and the growth of new power plants that produce pollution where it is unavoidable. But in the greater scheme of things, the way the climate sends signals back takes time. So the 1.5 degree, what it means is that by that time, we're going to understand how that excess heat is going to unleash more intensity on all the climate impacts, and particularly one of the sensitive points are ice caps and the poles. Also, they work around fundamental inertia, where something that happens now will affect 100 years from now, but also positive feedbacks. As soon as you start melting more ice, the entire planet reflects less energy, and so it heats up more. So these are very sensitive points. But I think something like a consensus on a specific ledger and also on science consensus, what we're going to see as a user perspective is we've really crossed a line and there's no way back. So I think we almost, to some extent, we need the shock, the peer-to-peer, the media and the information shock of what it is that's happened and we don't really realize. That's why it's hard to act on it. And this is going to hopefully perhaps change what indeed we think needs to change, which is a higher degree of consciousness at the individual level, and from there at the collective level. There is no way of solving this problem by pointing fingers. Oh, it's this country or it's this regulation. Everyone has a role, everyone is part of the planet. And as soon as we start getting more direct signals around our irreversible damage, perhaps it starts realizing how we are indeed a global planetary civilization and we have to work together. I want to actually just mention one last thing, is that one of the key things about the Open Innovation Lab and leveraging collaboration is that collaboration brings a mindset that we're all in something together, whereas competition and the driver of innovation really feeds into this illusions of separation. Here's me, there's you. And I just wanted to share how much it's been nice for us to work with you, Social Alpha, because I think you really bring in this mindset around, and perhaps it also might come in from the culture from the blockchain world, around a global community and the important role that you have. And so I really want to thank you, and I think we're in a consciousness level partnerships in that.
We appreciate that, and of course, the pleasure is all ours. Nydia, you mentioned that the kind of exponential impact side of the technology, and I think that I completely agree that, if we are to take like a linear approach to trying to solve climate change, we will probably die before we actually get there. And so perhaps an exponential or extra linear type of solution that we all know and love about blockchain is perhaps a good way to try and leap that gap in a way. I guess from the focus on environment for Social Alpha this year, do you want to talk about why we're focusing on the environment, and then specifically perhaps the process of grant making and vetting this grant, so that people who are also interested to get involved have a sense of like how it works?
Absolutely. I think to answer your first question, the reason behind why we have chosen that the environment will be our 2019 focus is really just because the urgency period. That, I was reading the 2019 World Economic Forum report. There is one sentence that just stick with me, which is that of all risks and crises, that the environment is actually the one that we are slowly walking into a catastrophe. So, I mean, as Martin said, it's not gonna be like 20, 35 years later that the one morning that we woke up and then we're like, okay, so right now we're at the end of the world. But it's actually the danger of this gradual and then slowly losing the access into our nature is very quite alarming. And so for Social Alpha, the reason we have chosen that the Yale Open Lab is that because first, the resource at the network and of course the brand that Yale has built, especially when it comes to environmental causes, has been proven that they are one of the best, and that we want to work with one of the best. And that we think is very unique that Yale as a university and also this initiative between these two important centers has chosen, which is we want to use blockchain, which is a very pioneering act coming from a traditional and historical agent. And we appreciate this opportunity, and we want to give an answer, and we want to set an example inside of the blockchain community to say, look, there is things that can be done. There are people that are willing to work with us. There are a group of people that slowly actually also fast in learning what the potential of the technology is, and then we are at a very exact moment that we can make things happen. So yeah, so that's one of the reasons that I have chosen Yale. And when it comes to selection process, is that in Social Alpha we are lucky to have a selection of people to form our vetting committee, our advisor, our strategic partner, and most importantly, our patrons. So when we started Social Alpha, one of the most important vision that we see is that we want to be the platform that support all the innovation when it comes to blockchain for social impact. But at the same time, we also want to encourage and we also want to recruit the first generation of blockchain philanthropists, because as we think that's just as important as advocating the technology itself. Imagine back to the 90s, if the first Gates, if the first Zuckerberg start to think about let's give back in the 90s, the world will probably be a very different place. And we are now, and then so we want to be one of the first, and then alongside with us, from our own network, from the global community, that we can have more and more philanthropists that want to give back. So for our vetting committee, so they are formed by a group of blockchain experts and also charity professionals. So together they can evaluate first, are the projects, are the research are tackling the most urgent issues that the world are facing? And secondly, is it current blockchain technology can support what the project is trying to do? As we see, while being visionary, we also need to be realistic.
And do you want to say just a bit about, in some ways, the function of Social Alpha as a charitable organization in terms of how it works in the process for the funds, and also maybe even a bit about the grant for Yale?
Absolutely. So our application channel is open for everybody on our website. So we receive incoming applications on a daily basis, and then we review them on a quarterly basis. The way we deployed our grant is that we will first host interviews, and then if the applicants had made into final list, they will, upon signing, they will receive half of the initial funding that's promised, and then we will deploy the remaining funding on a milestone basis.
And what was the size of the grant for the Yale in this case?
We are giving US $150,000 to Yale Open Lab.
Great. So, thank you. So I think we're running out of time, but I just wanted to kind of close with a couple comments and questions, I guess. Martine, what is it that you kind of hope for, kind of going forward? I mean, you're speaking to, again, what we hope are some of the future philanthropists from our generation of value creators, coming from a long history in both kind of academia as well as aid. What's the message that you want to give to them?
Well, I was trying to allude towards it that one thing that global planetary problems produce is that it realizes that we're all in this together. I really hope that the effort that we put into this project sends the signals back around a new wave of how we can reinvest into change, that every effort we put to a global problem comes back to us in one way or the other. In that sense, the planet it does checks and balances in a very wise way. So I really hope we were able to capture more attention from people to understand the challenge at hand and the role that smarter funding initiatives can have in that. But I also want to see, in general, community building around open source projects that address a global problem. And this is definitely one of the hypotheses, is that if we are to solve this, we have to tap into collective intelligence. And the open source world, the blockchain world is having a lot of advance in this in very short periods of time. And so independent to the actual specific tools that blockchain has, in general, this is a highly collaborative industry. It sometimes might not feel that way, but compared to other industries, it is. And I think that's also part of the decentralization mindset. So I definitely would love to see a community building around that. definitely, if you're working, if anything that we've said here resounds, please reach out to us. We're a total open platform for working with anyone from any angle. The grant also allows, we're going to consolidate a team to start doing development efforts. So we're definitely looking out for particular purpose-driven but rigorous talent around this. And you can read more in openlab.yale.edu. There's positions available. You can read other projects that we're hosting there. And it's really the test that it's not one university or one project that is going to solve this problem. It is all of us together bringing in a planetary consciousness.
Thank you. And Nydia, same last comments or messages for, again, this kind of generation of philanthropists?
Join us. Join the Social Alpha Foundation family, really. I mean, I think in here that we really want to really acknowledge that really the first kind of like batch of people that had, come and join us as patrons. We have to thank, Kenetic, Orbs, Hashed, Bluezil, Icon, Matt Rozak from Block, and also me and Jehan, we also personally donate a amount of money. So I think it's really not about the amount, it's really about the heart and the willingness to help and to build the ecosystem, to build a community, to share that you care. That I think is really the essence about blockchain, and it's about blockchain community.
Great. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for your attention. I hope you take this much to heart. Thank you so much.